It is up. So again, first off, thank you to coming to the first educational conversation. This is going to be an online classroom experience where I want to go ahead and bring SMEs, subject matter experts, individuals that I'm partnering with and collaborating with. And it's something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. And the reason for that is, when I was working with Soflete full time, I was able to really develop some new systems and protocols and ways to go ahead and educate individuals in a very private setting. And as I've now stepped away and cut the cord, no longer with Soflete, now starting GB3 Athletics under my own name, and it has been around since 2011. It's gone from a pure performance company to now becoming more of a educational / performance health and wellness company. And as the fitness industry and the human performance landscapes continues to grow, we want everyone to go ahead and take what it is that we're learning together, and that's a big piece here. And Julia is part of that. She has been an athlete of mine, and we met back in 2020 in Salt Lake City with the friends of ours out of nonprofit. I got to meet her and her husband, and that was a really great experience. And we got to go ahead and start working as a collaboration coach athlete relationship, where we were able to work to get her to finish her first 100-mile race up in West Virginia. And we pretty much have been rock and rolling since then as well. And she will go ahead and fill you in with everything she's done from her profession and some personal stuff. But again, we are partnering together now to bring a whole nother side of the house of health and wellness to actually improve peak performance, because we understand that even if you are performing at a high level, or you're trying to perform at a high level as a normal human being, there is a lot of things that we have to educate ourselves in. So that's kind of where we're going with this. Today is going to be with Julia. We'll be doing another one in 2 weeks with the fittest accountant. That's going to be John DeCoran. He is also an accountant as well, and helping out professional coaches and understanding finances. So that's exciting. And we'll dive into that at the back end of this conversation. But I wanted to go ahead and give the floor to Julia, and it's all you.
All right. Let me unmute myself because I got a crying baby in the back. Good morning. I'm Julia Gumpert. Thanks for the introduction, George, and the opportunity to hop on and kind of share some basic knowledge about what it is to be a healthy athlete. So just a little more about my background. Been a PA for almost 15 years now, have started to move more into this integrative medicine, functional medicine space over the last year, becoming frustrated with the system during COVID, and then getting to a point in my clinical career where I wasn't fulfilled, nor was I interested in controlling a disease process anymore, because it was getting to a point to where I felt like I was doing the opposite of healing. Adding a pill in order to meet a metric or a number is not the same as teaching a person how to have autonomy over their body and how to help heal and learn about the way that this wonderful thing works. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital as well, doing some like critical care, hospitalist medicine. Enjoyed seeing the other end of what happens with chronic disease and illness. So I've seen it from both fronts. I'm moving now into the preventative space. I've been in the middle where it's basically control space. And then at the end is like the result of the decline, right? The empire has fallen and now the body needs inpatient care. So excited to hop on here today. I struggled on which subject or topic to pick because I'm doing a couple of different things. My services are small right now. They will be expanding, but I need to maintain the quality of the service that I can provide over the quantity. So I didn't know whether or not to do a male hormone, a female hormone lecture, which would kind of segregate the audience. So I wanted to broaden this out and talk a little bit about gut health in the athlete. So titled this Gut Check, which is what I got a couple weeks ago in a race. So a little background about why I kind of dove into this heavily. From the beginning of my functional and integrative medicine interest, I have not wanted to be a microbiome specialist, nor do I want to be. That is still, this is just an entire different realm of science, an entire different realm of knowledge. However, it would be completely ignorant of myself not to investigate, especially whenever I have a problem, right? Because I think as athletes, part of us part of who we are is we're seeking something. We're seeking a next goal. We're seeking better knowledge of ourselves, or we're seeking this, finish for this race. So a couple weeks ago, I ran the River of No Return 108K in Chalice, Idaho, and I had something that I've never experienced before: gut problems. Not necessarily new to the ultra running space, run quite a few races, and over the years I've made a lot of mistakes and made strategical decisions to correct those. But I found myself at mile 38, 40, vomiting in the middle of a meadow, which was a slow, steady 1,800-foot climb, occasionally while getting poured on. Then I had some lower GI distress, had to wash pants out in a creek, then became super dehydrated, developed dry heaves, and essentially had no nutrition or hydration for about 12 miles at about 8,000 feet, which we'll talk about that a little bit, how that can compound the gut problems. So when I got back, I said, "Ooh, okay, my first mistake was a pot sticker that was probably soaked in oil. And my second mistake was carbonation." But why did the combination of those things create such a difficult and painful experience during this race? Because it doesn't always have to be like that. So, okay, we did introduction, George. I'm not the, hang on, let me swipe over.
Hey, we lost you, Julia. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, I muted myself.
There you go.
So first thing we're going to talk about today is why the gut is so important in all athletics. This is not a specific endurance. This is not specific to endurance athletes. So first thing is it's the source. It's the source of our energy. You have to have a good, compliant, resilient gut in order to consume and use macronutrients and micronutrients during an extended effort, or during an effort that requires you burn through your circulating glucose in order to have brain coherence or mental strength, or if you're doing something like a jiu-jitsu tournament where you need massive bursts of speed and you're just coming off of, say, a cut for a weight class. Like, your gut is where your energy actually comes from. Dysfunctional gut means poor performance from an energy perspective. So we also know now that the role of the gut in mood and motivation is way, way more than we originally thought 10 years ago. I think over the last 5 years, the amount of data that's come out and said that the gut is more important in your mental health than your actual brain itself is just astounding. So don't forget that your gut has serotonin and dopamine receptors. It's also involved in cortisol metabolism. It's involved in estrogen metabolism. So the gut is the source of the mood and the motivation. If you do not correct or balance the gut or avoid the things that irritate the gut, then all of those other metrics are going to suffer. And those are our happiness metrics, our vitality. Also, gut is comfort. It's really, you get a good feeling whenever you have a good, healthy, nutritious meal. You get a good night of sleep. And it also allows for you, chronic gut pain can cause mental fraying in a patient or mental fraying in a person. So to have this constant cycle, say an irritable bowel cycle where you're going diarrhea, constipation, and it gets to a point where it affects your life, now your gut is the source of the stress itself and not a comfort, not an energizer, and not a source for your happiness and wellness. And then the gut is also important in absorption and elimination. I just mentioned estrogen. When women get in peri and postmenopausal states, if they have a dysfunctional gut, or if they're having issues with bowel movements, they cannot completely evacuate the estrogen that has been metabolized and broken down, the toxic estrogens. So you end up with this buildup and shift of estrogens, which can cause a lot of issues in that transition of life. So the gut has so many roles in the body. The mind-gut axis is what it's called. The research is astounding. If you ever want to go down a rabbit hole of just investigating more, I would say go with the gut for sure. So we're going to talk a little bit about food sensitivities today. We're going to talk more about sensitivities than we are true allergies. And this will be on the next slide, the differences between. So the sensitivity of a gut is what the reason that we focus on it is because that is a source of what we call endotoxemia. And that is what actually causes us to have a leaky gut. So sensitivities are foods that you can tolerate without an immediate reaction, but they're also the foods that you need to make sure that you avoid. We'll talk about testing for that. We're going to talk about elimination diets a little bit, not specifically the diet itself, but the food that needs to be eliminated and why. And then whenever data is getting more and more validation and importance, especially in amateur athletics now. These major professional sports teams actually have a biochemist or a registered clinical pharmacist on staff because biomechanics are not separate from biochemistry. You can't have adequate and good biomechanics without a balance chemically. So don't think just because you're an amateur or just because you've only done a couple races that this doesn't apply to you, because it does. Because of everything in the first section there, the source. If you're stressing your gut performing these athletic events, then you're going to affect your gut on a daily basis. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. And then the last thing is you need to implement a plan. Data is just data unless you do something with it, unless you apply it for improvement. So correction of gut issues. The first thing is we're going to validate with data. We'll talk about that. We'll correct with either elimination or there's certain supplements if you have some dysbiosis in the gut, which is more bad bacteria than good. And then the most important thing that you need to understand that unless you correct your gut, you are going to have an increase in inflammatory response to exercise than you normally would. A lot of times people will have improvements literally in aches and pains and body aches once they balance their gut. Your gut is healing. And then the other thing is there is a necessary reevaluation seasonally of gut allergies in some patients and some clients because of the change of seasonal eating in foods. Okay, next one, George. All right. This is the next slide I was talking about. So today we're going to focus on sensitivity symptoms, sensitivity to foods and allergies to foods. So oftentimes these get used incorrectly. These are not interchangeable. These are not interchangeable words for this whole like just amalgamation of symptoms. So sensitivities occur 72 hours after consumption of the food that creates an inflammatory cascade in the gut. A true food allergy is nearly immediate. It's within 3 hours, you get tingling, the hives, the itchy throat. These are the ones where people will have extreme IgE levels to shrimp, and they're just shellfish allergy. Or sometimes patients with celiac disease and gluten will have significant abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting can develop celiac sprue. An allergy is different from sensitivity. Sensitivities are things that are more whispers. The allergies are the screams of the body, don't eat this anymore. But the sensitivities are whispers. The unfortunate thing about the sensitivities is we have a lot of these kind of on a more of a daily basis. If you have heartburn and you're having it 72 hours after a food that you just ate, that 72 hours, 72 hours before because of a food you've eaten then, if you're not aware of that and can literally go down this traffic pattern, this flow chart in order to identify what gave you that symptom, then you're basically stuck in the dark. You don't know what it was. And most people would just equate it to like the Mexican food they just had. But in reality, it may be the almonds that you had 3 days earlier. Acne, fatigue, and poor sleep, which happens with training and athletics sometimes anyway, depression, and then the malabsorption of vitamin and nutrients can lead to chronic fatigue states in female athletes and to poor recovery in athletes across the board. All right, next one, George. All right. What does an imbalanced or leaky gut do? So I've been fascinated at the role of the gut in brain coherence. Brain coherence is your reaction time to a stimuli, and it's a response to something that you have trained for. So, say for instance, you're doing some jujitsu, and you've drilled this specific pass 1,000 times. And then say you get into your competition the night before, you went out for a huge dinner, and then you had gut issues all night. You woke up, you had to fast, meet your weight class. Now you're going in to this competition. It doesn't mean that you don't understand the sweep or the position if you have issues in the competition. It may literally just be that you've had a decline in brain coherence because of gut disturbances that happened the day before. Whenever we have a leaky gut and we start to dump these endotoxins into our bloodstream, our brain is affected. You will have a slower reaction time, an impaired train of thought, and there actually is fascinating data on the effect of TBIs, on the gut. There actually is microscopic photographs of the gut lining actually disintegrating and becoming open and leaky within 3 hours of a traumatic brain injury. So these impact sports, say football, you're warming up, you get a ding to the head and get a mild TBI. Now you're in a game and you're trying to block someone coming around for a tackle. But because of that earlier injury, your gut and brain are now affected and you get hit again. These are these type of cycles. These are the reasons that professional sports teams have these clinical biologists and clinical pharmacists on staff, is to help them identify, analyze, and then physicians to help them repair the gut. So leaky gut, what exactly is it? Leaky gut can happen in a multitude of different pathways, but just to make it as simple as possible, damage occurs to the mucosal lining of our intestines, excuse me, which is only one cell deep. What happens is an insult will come. There'll be an increase in, let's say, lipopolysaccharides coming into the bloodstream. Your butyrate decreases, and then all of a sudden, what happens to the single layer of cells is it splits. Okay, single layer of cells splits, and now you have all of these byproducts entering the bloodstream, which will give you leaky gut. These things that are entering the bloodstream have a systemic effect, but more than anything, they have an inflammatory effect on the gut itself, the endocrine system, and the brain itself. So if your heart and lungs are healthy and your gut is not, that could be the piece that is actually preventing you from improving, especially in an endurance athletic capacity. Or it could also be the piece that is keeping you down, preventing your recovery, increasing body aches and pains, and causing issues with your diet. So stress hormones, we talked a little bit about estrogen earlier. Cortisol is involved in the gut. Whenever we're doing these long endurance activities, cortisol is just being cranked out because you're asking your body to go into a long-term survival mode. Cortisol is toxic to certain receptors on the gut at a certain level. Same thing, leaky gut occurs, then you start becoming endotoxic during your athletic event. So I mentioned lipopolysaccharides earlier. So whenever our gut has a decrease in blood flow, this is when dysbiosis occurs. So leaky gut is what happens as a result of dysbiosis and an actual imbalance in the inflammatory cascade in the gut. So leaky gut is the endpoint. How you get there can be different, just to clarify that. So lipopolysaccharides are what is released from dying good bacteria in your gut. So whenever you decrease blood flow to the gut in a long endurance activity, good bacteria, which are usually more sensitive to that type of thing, start to die off. When they die, their cells pop open, lipopolysaccharides are released into the gut. And as the gut permeability becomes worse and worse, these cells start to split open, and then all these lipopolysaccharides go into the bloodstream, which is over here to the right, endotoxemia. Endotoxemia is what happens during that acute gut injury during athletics, or as a result to us constantly eating these sensitivity foods that are going to give us an increase in inflammatory cascades. So endotoxemia is what causes brain coherence to go down, and it also is what causes our body to have the inflammatory reaction to the actual leaky gut. So leaky gut is the actual process. Endotoxemia is the chemical reaction that is causing all of these leaky gut symptoms. So if you eat a food that you are mildly sensitive to over time, what will happen is your endotoxemia or your response to the food with IgG will increase over time, and that food will become more and more and more toxic. So it's important whenever we go and talk in just a minute about food sensitivity panels that you understand that there is a reason for evaluating and removing these foods, because a little bit of poison can end up to be a massive effect on the body system over time. So we're not going to touch really too much today on zonulin and the overactivity of it. It's responsible for the integrity of the mucosal cells, the ones that split apart to give you leaky gut. But do understand that there are simple stool tests. One of them, one of the markers is butyrate. Butyrate is responsible for the actual what's called transepithelial resistance. So it's like the bodyguard for the cells of the gut. If you have a decrease in butyrate, you're going to have a more of a likelihood of having a leaky gut. Butyrate is actually added on to a lot of neurotransmitter studies and tests that are done in the functional medicine space, because butyrate is also dramatically responsible and linked to poor mental health, depression, anxiety. So if you can increase butyrate in the gut, often you can improve neurotransmitter circulation in there as well. So this endotoxemic cascade can end up literally affecting you from athletics all the way to your everyday vitality, mental health, and life. All right, next one. Okay, so this is a kind of a busy graph, but it's what this is illustrating is the actual GI disruption during intense exercise. In order to have a proper intestinal barrier, all of these inflammatory properties that are coming in, like the interleukins, you've got stress hormones coming in, cortisol is just all assaulting the gut on the right-hand side, and then you end up with a leaky, permeable mucosal layer. The side on the left is a healthy, good intraepithelial resistance layer. I don't want you to underestimate what exercise does to the gut, and I don't want you to be afraid of it, but I want you to see and understand that if you understand the process and you can control the factors that can be controlled, the impact of exercise on the gut can be less and your recovery can be quicker. So also involved in here is that redistribution of blood, like I was talking about. The longer you run, the higher your heart rate, the higher the intensity. Blood is shunted away from the mesentery, which are these tiny vessels that feed the entire gut, and it's repurposed into the heart and lungs. So cytokines are going on here. There is there's illustrated like some shift in the gut microbiota. And then there's a GABA and neuropeptide receptor shown up there as well. If you really want to dive into the chart, it's super fascinating at how many different mechanisms and how many different insults are occurring on the gut during exercise, which can lead to injury if you don't understand what's happening and take steps to hopefully lessen the effect. All right, next one. Okay, so sensitivity testing. In primary care in allopathic medicine, which is Western medicine, we would always just order blood tests, and it would be basic. In the South, we have a lot of tick-borne food sensitivity issues. One of those conditions is called alpha-gal, where you basically can't eat any meat unless it has fins or feathers, which basically ruins a whole lot of people's lives. But the lab tests are small as far as which foods they test. They are extremely expensive and quite honestly are incomplete. So most food sensitivity tests just check IgE, which is that immediate, I have a food allergy response. So it will show you a mild, moderate, or high sensitivity or allergy to the specific food that you tested against, which is usually like shellfish, the meats. They'll do wheat, barley, rye, and sometimes certain foods. So normally what we do is we just run that one test and then we say, oh, you're not, you're allergic, you have a mild allergy to this, stay away from this food, or a moderate allergy to this. What we should be doing is running panels that show us IgG and C3b and D. So complement is C3b and D. Complement is a very important inflammatory marker in the body. If you have high complement levels, that means that you definitely have an inflammatory, whether it's systemic or local, doesn't matter, because systemic inflammation local inflammation ends up being systemic if you don't prevent it. So an elevated complement level will let me know how your body is actually responding to the sensitivity of the food that you're eating. Food sensitivities are measured by measuring IgG, which is a immunoglobulin that's released within 3 to 72 hours after eating a food sensitive. It causes the low-grade chronic inflammation, and if you have that complement level also elevated, then you're having more indication of the systemic inflammatory response. IgG is also directly involved in histamine. So if you have somebody that has a ton of seasonal allergies, if you're struggling with that or eczema, then you're probably micro-exposing yourself to these sensitive foods over and over and over again, and then you're stuck in this histamine loop. So data, we have to have the correct data. The panel that I use tests for 88 common foods. It's a blood test, and it checks IgE, IgG, and C3b and D. So lots of excellent information coming in for that. Now that you know which foods you're sensitive to, you have to eliminate them. So if you're already training, you're investing time, you're investing money into a coach, you're investing, you have a home gym that costs thousands of dollars, and then you grab this data, which is in your hands, and then you don't eliminate the thing that your body is telling you it can't tolerate, then you've just done a whole lot of stuff for not a very good reason. Know thyself. I need to somehow implement that into like my business. Now that you have the information, now you have to do something with it. So this is where a nutritionist comes in. Say you're having massive issues with wheat, and you're like, well, crap, now I don't know what to do. Gluten-free diets are terrible, and I'm a runner and I want to use this, or I'm, a sprinter and I like to use this carbohydrate and it has gluten in it. This is where you seek out expert nutritional advice. I worked with Aaron Blevins at Shut Up and Eat during a running season when I was breastfeeding, and we had to eliminate some foods that were causing issues. So that is when you go seek out an expert, especially if the food that you're sensitive to is composing a bulk of your macronutrient profile. And then I mentioned this earlier, never think that biomechanics and biochemistry are separate. So performance aspects. So if you understand the sensitive foods, you're going to have even better performance in, we'll call them inopportune or more hostile environments. So let's say heat, which already is stressful on the gut, because whenever you actually heat the internal core body temperature up, the gut will actually become endotoxic from there because it's a microvascular shock. And then all of those little lipopolysaccharides will filter out and cause issues. And then the other thing is altitude. Just because you live at altitude doesn't mean that you don't have gut dysbiosis as a result of altitude. Your resting heart rate is higher, your heart rate variability can be more significant or pronounced. And if you are an athlete that is going to compete at sea level, then you should try to prepare for or replicate the effects of altitude on the gut as much as possible in order to identify early warning signs, and so that you can develop a plan to fix yourself if those things happen. George and I were having a conversation, I think a couple of days ago, about the effect of carbonation on the gut at altitude. I highly recommend that you try to stay away from carbonation at altitude. Just because you can tolerate it doesn't mean that it's not negatively affecting you. And they may be in these micro declines and say brain coherence or muscle endurance. But if you're climbing a big mountain or you're on a massive expedition, those little things matter. And so the other unfortunate thing is the harder you go, the more gut stuff you're going to have happen. There are multiple head-to-head studies about athletes who exercise in that zone 2, like 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, compared to professional athlete or more intense amateur athlete. The patients over here functioning at the higher level more intensely have much more gut issues than these moderate exercise folks. So if you really have a significant issue with your gut and you need to reset, rest is important because it also affects your gut health. And then also if you have an autoimmune history, if you've got Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or if you've got a history of rheumatoid, or you have a positive ANA factor but negative C-reactive protein, so you a negative C peptide, so you don't have lupus but you have a positive ANA. These are all things to where your body is already at an inflammatory state. And once you drive all these polysaccharides and these endotoxic chemicals through the gut barrier and into the bloodstream, all you're doing is amplifying that. And then removing the sensitive foods, rebuilding the gut, addressing gut lining or gut issues with like some oral peptides like BPC or KPV, which have fantastic data associated orally at healing and restoring the gut, will help you build a resilient gut. Do not think that you're never going to have gut issues ever again. And don't think that you can prevent this process from happening, because intense exercise, no matter what your sport, is going to have this effect on the gut. The only thing that differs is how long it takes you to get there, how long you stay there, and how quickly you recover from it. Okay, George, next one. Thank you. Okay, and then we've kind of already talked a little bit about this, of like what things affect the intestinal membrane themselves. Cortisol, which is dramatically increased in endurance athletes. The claudin 2 is another chemical that's involved in the epithelial integrity of the gut wall. And then all the supplements in the world, I'm going to say it again, all the supplements in the world, including prebiotics and probiotics, will not fix your gut if you continue to consume sensitive foods that over time can lead to allergies. A lot of times people will get overwhelmed if they do a functional medicine consult or functional dietitian consult. I've seen many patients come back with literally this spreadsheet full of vitamins and supplements. And they're like, okay, you need to detox your gut from Candida. You need to do this, you need to do that. And these will all be recommendations based off of either an indican level on a stool test, which can indicate dysbiosis because indican is put off by an improper ratio of good bacteria to bad gut bacteria. If you don't restore the gut first by avoiding the sensitive foods and basically let it regrow and recover, then you're not going to be able to build it back up with supplements. So diet and nutrition is the foundation of a healthy gut. Now, I am in the team of, I learned things the hard way, especially, Ben will probably laugh about this, especially stuff with the stomach and gut issues. I'll eat it and then I'll be like, oh, no, I can't do that anymore. That caused major issues. And then all of a sudden one day it's presented to me on a different plate and I'm like, oh, I think I can do it today. The answer is I can't, and probably neither can you. So this is, once again, know thyself. Be honest with yourself of like, is this food worth it? A lot of us are amateur athletes. There's also some professionals, hopefully they're on this call, that understand that if you don't perform, your livelihood is affected. Amateur athletes, if you go to a race and you don't finish because you have gut issues and you know, made bad decisions and you had all of this data, being ignorant of the fact of the effect of athletics on the gut, and then having the data and repeatedly ignoring it, those are two separate things. So really have an honest conversation with yourself of like, hey, is this worth my time, money, and effort, and hauling my family all around to support me for these things if I'm not going to use this wonderful data that I have? And don't forget that sensitivities over time will lead to true allergies, especially with shellfish, especially with barley, and especially with, this is environmental, but bee stings. That's another one that the body just doesn't tolerate long-term over time. Okay, next one, please. Oh, this is like the coolest graph. Also a little busy, but this is a fantastic example of the gut-brain axis. So all of these signals coming down from the brain, telling your kidneys to do stuff, telling your liver, gut, lungs, heart. I mean, it is just astronomically illustrated how the gut is the powerhouse of all of these things. You know, it's just fascinating. I really hope you guys will dive into that chart a little bit. I'm not going to hit it too much because of just time. And then the next one. Oh, and then treatments. So let's say you want to have a consult. So this is what we would do. We would do an intake form. It would be an evaluation and analysis of your sport or your lifestyle in general. This isn't just for athletes here. Dysbiosis and gut issues happen from stress as well, which we emphasized with the cortisol earlier. If you're having mental health struggles or if you're on hormone replacement therapy and you're still just not feeling better, the missing part is probably your gut. So intake form and questionnaire. Once again, I'll go ahead and say that not everybody is appropriate for like telehealth and remote functional medicine services, which is why I ask that everyone complete a consult before, because there is best practices and do no harm Hippocratic oath that I adhere to as far as that goes. So intake form, questionnaire, an evaluation of symptoms, and then an evaluation of your goal. You know, if you were trying to improve your bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, say you're on testosterone therapy and you're only going to the bathroom once every 3 days, yeah, you're not eliminating your androgenic hormone breakdown. Like you need a gut health assessment. Or if you're on a ton of testosterone and just nothing's happening, the next thing we look at is the gut. So you have to have adequate bowel movements. This is where pre and post prebiotics and probiotics can come into handy, or are handy, but there also is an issue of histamine. There are some histamine-free probiotics, and whether or not you need a histamine-free version of that really just depends on clinical history and patient intake, and history of present illness stuff. So there are options to help you eliminate and move the bowels on a more regular basis. And there also are ways that you can increase your fiber intake without the consumption of grains and wheat. So you don't know what you don't know until you have the information in front of you. Food sensitivity panels are the actual blueprint or map to a treatment protocol. So the next one is supplements and peptides. I mentioned BPC and KPV earlier. Taken orally, they only stay in the gut and work to repair intestinal permeability and the actual health of the gut lining itself. I don't recommend that people go through a peptide therapy until they've completed an elimination diet for at least 4 to 6 weeks to allow the inflammatory cascades to reset. And then the other thing that's important with a gut assessment is you have to know the rest of your metabolics. If you have a liver that is compromised because you're drinking alcohol, your liver function tests are up, or you've got iron issues, or you've been at altitude and now you have some leftover like microvascular changes, or you're a woman and you've increased your mileage and now you don't have a period and you have increased progesterone. all of these like metrics and metabolic markers matter, because without them, the plan can be incomplete. Because the gut is so complex, if there's any system in the body that would require complexity to fix it, it would probably be the gut. However, if you don't start simply and do it in a scientific way, and you start doing all these things at one time, then you're not going to know what worked and what didn't. And it also is going to save you time and probably finances as well, because unfortunately, your insurance company doesn't want you to get better. They don't want you to use your insurance, but they also benefit from you being sick over time. Because what happens is a negotiation from the hospital and the insurance usually results in the insurance coming out profitable at the expense of the hospital, whatever they just charged for the service. So there's a disconnect. Doctors are yelling at you that we care about you, but yet no one will sit down and have an hour-long honest conversation with somebody about their Chick-fil-A consumption and about how it's increasing gut dysbiosis, decreasing their dopamine, decreasing serotonin, making them depressed, interfering with their sleep, and interfering with their menstrual cycles. Nobody will take the time to do it. So super important. Treatment plan depends on which data you're looking at and consuming. Okay. Does anybody have any questions right now? And then I'll talk about the rest of the stuff. How do I see these, George? Do I just like swipe and look?
It'll pop up if anybody asks anything or raise their hand. So if you want to raise your hand, guys, go ahead and just raise your hand, or come on and just jump on and ask a question. But I'll actually get it started. I'm looking at my other screen too. So I'll actually get it started. First off, Julie, you were talking about endurance athletes. We're talking about all types of human beings. And I think that's something that's really great, because again, the both of us look at it as humans first, profession, our athletic endeavors, or anything second, right? Or everything else second. So when we hear mileage, when you hear time on feet, that's just stress, I guess, is what I want to share with everybody. That at the end of the day, our body doesn't really care if it's running miles, if it's lifting weights, or if you're a task professional who is on a mission, if you're a BJJ athlete doing that. That is just a identification of stress in a specific sphere that you're working in. So when we go ahead and talk about this, and Julia shares all these things of cortisol and how this all blends in, it's just stress at that. The longer you are under stress, the more your gut starts to have issues. And I'm really big on this as well, as like, it's something that I've had to fix myself. It's something Julia and everyone else around me that's really close in that circle have seen me do through different types of elimination diets and exercise. I haven't had to jump over into the peptides world just yet, and I hope I don't have to. But again, it's one of those things where we can play with it and continue moving on. So one of the questions actually just popped up right now to everybody. It came on from Dylan. Did we discuss effects of heat and how this has an acute gut disruption? So that's for you, Julia. You want to dive down that real quick? That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So what heat actually does is the same thing as an increased heart rate. So there's microvascular changes. So the vessels actually constrict, because the more the gut is overheated, the more that intestinal permeability layer, the cell layer, breaks down. And what will happen with gut what happens with heat's effect on the gut is you create oxidative stress that way. So you actually have had a decrease in oxygen to the cell layer itself. Things die, leak out, same way. But heat specifically affects the vessels, not the actual like chemical process itself. So it's more of a mechanical beginning to a chemical cascade.
So second question to that is going to be, what is the long-term effects of that over time, especially for, during a long endurance event in that manner, or just mission planning, how you want to look at it?
Yeah. So I think it depends, right? There are going to be certain things, especially you mentioned like, the operators, guys in the military, like you don't really get to avoid your food sensitivities on like your MREs, when you're in the field. But I think over time, the way that it can, over time, athletics is going to have the same effect on the gut, but you get to determine how resilient the gut is. So resiliency comes with how quickly you recover from the, why can I not talk all of a sudden? Resiliency is how quickly you rebound from the activity, how quickly you restore that gut lining and the permeability, and then how long it takes you to get there in the first place. So there's going to be absolutely nothing we can do to negate the effect of exercise on the gut. We can do everything about how much it affects it and how quickly we recover from it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I have another question. So I've worked with individuals who've gone through long selections that are 12 months plus. Some of it might be even shorter than that. Some might have, long endurance events. And I've looked at the recovery time after those events, and it's been around the gut instead. How would you approach someone coming out of, let's say, Ranger School or a 100-mile race or a Best Ranger Challenge or the Recon Challenge or a long weekend of fighting like Worlds and IBJJF, where they were getting calories in like crazy, and now it's time to recover, right? What does that look like in terms of like how you approach that for yourself and others you've worked with?
Yeah, so I can't emphasize like sleep enough on that one. Adequate sleep. And depending on the type of exercise and the type of insult to the gut, say we'll actually use me, for instance, on this. So River of No Return took me 2 weeks metabolically to get over. I couldn't eat a meal until I finished my race at 1 a.m. I went to quote unquote sleep. It was terrible. And then I couldn't eat the next day until noon. So, I burned, 16,000 calories during this day at altitude with all these GI issues, with honestly, not a very resilient gut. Like I haven't been taking good care of it. It took me 2 weeks to physically, mentally, emotionally, and metabolically to improve from that. And like gut still isn't right. So the longer the effort, the worse the insult. I would actually recommend buffering the cortisol. That depends on which supplement you would use or which protocol you would use is very patient dependent. But I would do a round of peptides after that. I would do a round of oral peptides just to recover and repair. If you're dealing with something that is high intensity but shorter duration, I probably would recommend more of the nutritional cleaving and removing of the things that are agitating and sensitive. If you're working from a platform of not having this data to begin with. So high intensity, shorter duration, I would eliminate a ton of foods that you probably know you shouldn't be eating at the beginning. But for these longer endurance efforts, especially ones that are, like selection, like you were talking about, a peptide recovery therapy probably is what you need because of the intensity of the activity plus the duration.
Cool. My next question, if anybody doesn't have one, look, there we go. We have someone coming up right now. Long-term gut, long-term impact on TBIs on the gut. Does the amount of TBIs correlate to the amount of time to recover the gut, and does it matter? Will gut resiliency assist in to minimize the impact the TBIs have on the system? So a big TBI question.
So the resiliency of the gut, theoretically, I think would have less of an impact. Repetitive TBIs, what happens over time is there's actually a fraying in the connectivity between the gut and the brain that usually requires repairing the nervous system to restore. So TBIs are a little more, they're a little more of a serious topic because we're now involving like both ends of the axis, right? We're affecting the gut and the brain axis. We're not just affecting the gut axis, which affects the brain. Like we're insulting both things. I have been involved with specifically veteran care for many, many years. And what I find that actually, if you drink alcohol and you have a history of TBIs, quite frankly, you just shouldn't do it. You literally will never repair your gut, and you'll never have the opportunity to feel what gut resiliency feels like if you constantly are becoming endotoxic because of alcohol. I know quite a few people, my husband's one of them, that if they come off of the carnivore diet, the gut will calm down. The inflammation systemically in the nervous system and the gut itself will decrease. musculoskeletal, he feels much better, less aches and joint pains. So I think probably if you have had multiple TBIs, yes, you can recover and improve the gut lining. No, you won't if you continue to consume alcohol because of its role. But TBI gut injuries are more specific and serious because it's both an up down and a down up insult. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the process would be the same, as far as like eliminating the sensitive foods, figuring out what's out of balance, rebalancing, addressing cortisol, addressing sleep. But it's really difficult whenever you're constantly having the nervous system insult on top of it.
Yeah. I want to add to that actually, because that's something I've dealt with working with individuals that have TBIs, and obviously I didn't attack the gut right away, but I did attack the metabolic system from an endurance standpoint. And if no one realizes, endurance is a metabolic sport, strength training is more of a neurological demand. And this is something I took into consideration when I understand endurance. And you hear us talking about endurance like crazy, and it's because we are enduring mammals. We are meant to endure. So realistically, like I said before, stress is part of this enduring process. So we're just trying to teach ourselves to be resilient to stress, tolerate it, and improve our capacity. We talked a little about like lower intensity training and moderate volume. And that's something that I've actually got to help a few athletes with, or individuals with, is implementing a lower intensity, lower volume style training, which then helps reset the gut because of the fact that we are getting it to metabolically be more flexible, meaning that it knows how to burn fats, it knows how to burn carbohydrates, and it knows how to burn proteins. So that is something that's really important there. And, we mentioned the carnivore diet, we mentioned, fad diets and stuff like that. I'm not saying the carnivore diet's a fad diet. It's in some people's eyes, it is. What we're trying to say here is we're eliminating processed foods. We're eliminating foods that are not real, meaning that we're eliminating things that our gut is not meant to digest properly. And I had this really cool come to Jesus moment a couple years ago where it was, I was really deep into fixing my own headspace, fixing my own gut, and really trying to figure all that out. And what I found was it wasn't just the sleep that really mattered. It was actually the attitude and the perception and the lens in which I looked at everything. And I think that's the big piece here with this is, Julia made a really good example earlier about, I know that I can't eat Chick-fil-A chicken strips. They're amazing. They're great. I love them. Everybody loves them. Or they're like honey biscuits. They're great. But know that there's going to be repercussions after that. But you put on a different plate, I forget about the repercussions, and it happens again. So the idea here is it's coming down to, it's a choice. It is willingness to discipline. And that is something that, we want to go ahead and educate and inform you guys with. It's like, hey, look, like you can live a certain lifestyle, but just know that there's ramifications from it. And especially if you've tolerated higher levels of stress throughout your upbringing and even up to this point. So now you're just teaching your gut to go ahead and utilize foods to where it doesn't take as long to break down. So we send energy elsewhere. So I've said this before on other podcasts in the past, but the idea that I look at from the energy perspective is this: if I eat really clean and I avoid really high processed foods, I'm a ball of radiating energy and huge energy just coming off of me. And then when I eat like crap, the energy ball goes like this. And I no longer want to do that. And I had a conversation with an athlete this morning before this call where he was like, oh, I had Haagen-Dazs ice cream last night, which I'm not against Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Like, we know that it's really good and everything else, but like there's certain types of ingredients in it that are going to cause issues. So I asked him what type of food he ate or what kind of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. And I was like, well, if you're going to do that, obviously do the vanilla because it's real ingredients, and don't do the whole pint, do half the pint only. So again, you're learning, again, the phrase of know thyself. That's what we're trying to say. We're not saying that you can't do these things or whatever else, but it's understanding that, hey, maybe there needs to be a certain prescription or dosage that my body is able to handle. And then we can go ahead and go from there, because we're not trying to tell you to stop living your life.
No, true. And that's where the sensitivity data helps, right? Because it's easy to tell yourself that, hey, that didn't affect me that much. But if you remove it, and you haven't had, say, dairy for 4 weeks, and all of a sudden your recovery time is cut in half, or you've had improvement in sleep, or you've had no more acid reflux, like these are the things that are important for you to try and know, because without it, you may be missing this entire puzzle of health and wellness. And it's like, yeah, we're talking about athletics, but overall, I mentioned over and over again, dopamine and serotonin receptors in the gut. If you have an unhealthy gut, you're going to have mental health issues. A lot of times there are these new integrative psychiatric offices that are popping up that literally don't start any medication therapy on patients until they balance the gut. Like, don't underestimate in just your daily vitality and living how important your gut is.
Yeah. Cool. Moving on. I hope that answered the question on TBI. And that's actually something we probably can dive down more. Actually,
yeah, we can. Yeah.
So we'll make a note of that. Next one is from Megan. She's asking, similar to heat question, but what about cold and altitude? What is the cold? So stress is stress. It's
so
dive down that for sure.
Yeah. So extreme altitude and extreme cold, you're getting two things. You're still getting vasoconstriction. So it's going to involve the mesentery as well. So when everybody leaves here, I want you to Google like the mesentery of the gut. Actually look at the blood flow of the gut. It is, first off, it's beautiful. These big major vessels with like these giant webs and stars of small microvessels that are just feeding every square inch of this, this gigantic gut wall that is like weaving in and out inside of our abdomen. So you're going to have micronutrient impairment with cold because you're still getting vasoconstriction. What I see usually in people who are on expeditions, say you need to acclimatize, like you're going to Denali, or you've come back from, doing something down in Peru, even Kilimanjaro. I had a guy last year that was still having a ton of issues. Cold and prolonged altitude exposure together are a perfect combination for a decrease in ferritin. So you actually get iron deficiency anemia, which can become pretty significant. And just because you're at cold and not in heat, the oxidative stress of the gut becoming irritated and stressed out because of the decrease in blood flow, the gut is still going to have oxidative stress happen. You're still going to get endotoxemic, but more than anything, prolonged cold exposure is going to increase your caloric demand. We all know this. The colder you are, the more you burn through things, especially if you're moving in the cold, the more you need fat to be metabolized, which if you have a leaky gut, fat can just sit there and just stew and brew and give you reflux. But the oxidative stress is the same, but the ferritin is really the key there. You need to go into those type of events and expeditions, making sure that you have an adequate hemoglobin hematocrit and that your ferritin level is appropriate, because if not, you're basically, you're setting yourself up for just a nasty combination of gut issues there.
Nice. Cool. Next question I have actually on this, and something it's something we've seen across the board like crazy, especially increase in military personnel as well as just kind of our society, and that's going to be some type of cancer. I've had to work with a few athletes and who have dealt with it in the past, as well as trying to help them stay physically resilient to the stress they're putting themselves under. When we look at diet, there's so many controversial conversations and research literature behind it. From your experience over the past 13 years that you've been doing this, what have you found with the gut and the link between radiation and recovering from all the treatment stuff like that to help them improve, right? Because we know there's hyperbaric chambers, there's vitamin C dosing and all that, but how do we go ahead and help really recover from a gut perspective?
From a gut perspective, it's the elimination diet, like no doubt. If you are actively going through cancer or chemotherapy, you are going to be constantly in this inflammatory state. You're going to want to suppress, you want to activate these T helper cells. You want to decrease your tumor necrosing factor. Like, all of these things are inflammatory mediators or involved in an inflammatory cascade. And they also are going to prevent DNA degradation and damage and dysfunction, which is what cancer is, a hyperproliferative cell that is just multiplying in a place where it shouldn't be, sometimes with a function that it shouldn't have. So if you create less of a prime environment for this thing to occur, then your likelihood of responding to chemotherapy or treatment, and probably the more you'll be able to tolerate certain chemotherapies and treatments. Active cancer is pretty much the only contraindication for most peptides. However, I do know that there are quite a few practitioners out there that are doing groundbreaking research on adding these peptide stacks in for these patients that are undergoing chemotherapy and radiation. But controlling the inflammation, and a lot of times chemotherapy, most of the drugs will make you insulin resistant. So paying attention to prioritize protein over an excess in carbohydrates is going to help just improve healing. I mean, you've got to start with as much of a clean and unirritated slate as possible, especially going into chemotherapy, because sometimes it can be more harmful on the metabolic system than the actual cancer itself. Oh, and another thing I didn't mention is the effect of certain drugs and over-the-counter drugs on the gut.
Okay.
So most commonly in athletics, we'll use, some acetaminophen or Tylenol or Advil, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And then sometimes people with like say disc issues or lower back problems will be prescribed an oral corticosteroid. If you take Tums, if you're on metformin, if you've had any cholesterol medication, all of these things affect the gut biome. And so all of those things are important, especially if you're having a conversation with your healthcare provider, or if you come for a consult, to let me know. And there's also certain supplements that have an effect on the gut biome. So it may not be what you're eating, it may be what you're taking. I've also been one in the, I'll pop some ibuprofen here and there in the middle of a race, but not anymore. Not anymore after the experience I had a couple weeks ago. I want to control every factor that can be controlled. So ibuprofen is off the table for me now.
Oh, good. I'm going to continue to ask a question because I have a lot of them, and this is
keep going.
I want to continue learning. I'm pretty sure everyone else is as well. I've been playing with HRV since 2015. I've been utilizing it with Elite HRV, and if they don't know who Elite HRV is, they're probably one of the #1 leading companies in the space to be doing some really good work with heart rate variability. They were way before Whoop. They were way before all the other companies out there. And one of the big things that I'm noticing with HRV is we can actually track food sensitivity. Have you read any literature, or you found anything with utilizing HRV and how food actually causes a change in HRV numbers from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state?
No, I actually haven't. You just gave me another rabbit hole to dive down. Most of what I've been researching lately is the effect of heart rate on the gut, not the effect of heart rate from the gut. I definitely, the gut is involved in both parasympathetic and sympathetic, processes. So it makes total sense, but I do know that heart rate is super important to monitor. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, Coach George. If you wake up in the morning and your resting heart rate is elevated comparative to your known baseline resting heart rate, I think it would be an interesting piece of information to have, especially if you already know your food sensitivities. Say you go and have, a tequila 3 days ago, and for 3 days you have an increase in that morning resting heart rate. Like, that's a super important piece of data, because that's a cardiac effect from your gut, which, once again, we go back to that crazy graphic that I had up that showed the gut, the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, the brain, heart, lungs, kidney, like everything is all interconnected.
Nice. All right, Julia, there's a question that's up right now, and I'm gonna add on top of that real quick before we move to this from Ian.
Okay.
But you can see the question in the chat if you want to, real fast, so you can get ready for it. But so talking about heart rate, I think the heart rate is the most simple number because it relays all of the complex systems in which the body actually connects to it, both brain, gut, and all that good stuff. what I found with tracking food and resting heart rate in the morning, this is something I have a lot of athletes do, is we monitor morning resting heart rate. It's because we are able to see what our body's doing from an adaptive lifestyle response, right? And what is adaptive lifestyle response or adaptive training response? Meaning, what is all the stress around you doing to your heart, right? What's that look like? Are you sleeping well? Are you getting your 28 to 35 cycles a week? What does that mean? 90-minute cycles is one, or 90-minute of sleep is one cycle. Try and shoot 4 to 6 per night, sometimes even 7. But then when we go and look at hydration, mineral intake, we look at, the nutrients that we put in, as well as overall internal and external stress. All of that plays a factor into that morning resting heart rate. And again, a lot of you will realize this, hey, if I sleep only 3-4 hours, my resting heart rate actually is way higher. Oh, but if I sleep for 6 hours or 6.5 hours, my resting heart rate's at baseline. If I sleep for 7.5 hours to 8 hours, my resting heart rate has actually increased. I've seen that happen. Again, I haven't found a lot of research on why this happens, but I have seen this happen where you oversleep. It creates a reset in the nervous system. How, I don't know. I'll probably look more into it. But again, there's these like really happy medium percentages, or I'm sorry, prescriptions and dosing that we have to give ourselves, not just from a medical standpoint, but from sleep, nutrition, and hydration. It's the same way too, looking at your calorie intake. If you only put in 1,200 calories for the day and you burned 3,000, how is the heart actually going to respond to that? That's something that we have to think about as well. Same thing for if we don't put enough hydration in and we are out running in the 90-degree weather and I didn't recover fast enough. We have to understand that our heart is a muscle, and it does also experience delayed on muscle soreness. It does have that. So just understand that, like, when we go and look at the heart rate and the morning resting heart rate, that is probably going to be the most insightful way to track what your system is doing from an internal and external standpoint, as well as feeling in that manner. So, yeah. Did you want to read the question? Or did you find it? You're muted.
Sorry, did it again. I think the question was about any precautions for an ostomy.
Yeah.
So yes, there are some specific precautions for ostomy. With any type of ostomy, one thing that you're going to have is you can develop this thing called a dumping syndrome, which is where you have a dramatic loss of gastric secretions, which can cause an imbalance in magnesium and potassium, and these acidic gates and pumps that is necessary for. It actually wasn't really uncommon to see these patients that are relatively healthy that will have a partial colectomy because of colon cancer. They'll have an ostomy put in, and they'll be doing great, but all of a sudden they'll get weak and tired, dizziness with standing, or sometimes they'll pass out. And a lot of times that's an electrolyte imbalance. Usually they're really hypomagnesiemic, hypokalemic, because they're losing this constant gastric secretions. So food sensitivities will be important. Of course, you want to reduce inflammation, especially if you've had your ostomy put in because of an inflammatory disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, or if you've had a colectomy because of a cancerous or an adenomatous polypus process. But there are certain things that you have to orally replace that electrolyte wise that probably most people wouldn't need. So the metabolic data would probably be more important in those patients than the actual food sensitivity data. Like, that would be the ideal picture. But definitely, like, checking the electrolytes, especially checking the albumin to make sure the caloric intake and reabsorption of things are adequate. Usually everyone with a new ostomy in the hospital would receive a dietary consult. So a registered nutritionist would come around, registered dietitian, and have a conversation of like, hey, these are the foods that usually they put these patients on a higher fiber diet. These are the foods that are going to help you prevent this like dumping syndrome and loss of gastric secretions. So yeah, there are some very specific, GI related precautions for sure. Thanks, Jessica.
I did it myself also. Yeah, it got me. Sweet, guys. Honestly, that's it. We're kind of coming to an end
Good.
with this educational conversation. Again, this is something that we want to continue doing. I will be having Julia on more. We'll be diving down the rabbit hole about everything and anything when it comes to her experience and what she has a passion about, as well as I really enjoy learning about this stuff. Again, it's my way of continuing learning. It's a very selfish thing, I feel like sometimes, right? Like, hey, what is this we're doing? Well, it's because I want to learn. Let's bring others people in and learn as well. So that has been the big piece here with that. And, you know, what we'll be doing here as a whole, especially with Julia, is she will be partnering with GB3 Athletics. And what does that mean? It's a collaboration that now whenever an athlete comes on and works with GB3 Athletics, this be through the blog that's coming out shortly, or the active learning group that we're building, or just individual programming or remote coaching, you have access to Julia. She will then be able to help navigate, and you have that option to go towards her and have her help do that. I have been recommending all my athletes to do it. Actually, I've been sharing it with her. We've been doing a lot of great things under the or behind the curtain as we've been building this out for the past month or so to make it happen. And we've actually worked with quite a few individuals together now, and we're seeing some great responses from the systems in which we put in place to make this happen. So again, you know, Julia's going to be around forever. I love the fact that she's a part of this. She wants to collaborate. She wants to go ahead and share her information on a bigger scale now. And I feel like I can offer that to her as well as everyone else in our circle. So those that have, you know, showed up today, that was awesome. Again, I'm not going to lie to you. I wasn't expecting to see, you know, 30 people respond to come to this, and we had 15 show up. I appreciate you got everyone coming in and showing interest and support in this, because we are going to continue doing this. This is going to be something epic. I've always had a passion for educating and teaching, and getting my master's in arts and English, emphasizing education. It's really taught me how to go ahead and develop an approach to go ahead and offer this service and this type of environment for everybody. Again, it's 2023, technology is blowing up. Why not start utilizing and taking advantage in that manner and using it in a very healthy way? So yeah, I don't have much anymore. Julie, do you have anything?
No, I don't. I appreciate it. I also enjoy taking PA students for probably like most of my career, and I love it. I will say everything we talked about today is not medical advice. It is from my own expert opinion, which is not the same thing as advice, and it is related to experience. For expert medical advice, please reach out for a consult. On the last slide is my contact information. I also put 2 additional Instagram handles on there. One of my friends, Josh Tyler, made a fantastic suggestion the other day. I love doing male hormone replacement, but I also love doing female hormone replacement. But I don't want the men to have to look at the social media content for the women, and vice versa. So I went ahead and made a female hormone account and a male hormone account, and then Full Spectrum Medicine PLLC will remain more of the catch-all collaborative account with GB3 Athletics. But if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to email me. I'm thankful I have a lot of fantastic subject matter experts in my contacts. So if I don't know, we will find it out together. And I honestly, guys, today I named it gut check because I got checked in the gut a couple weeks ago. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I've known a lot of this information for a really long time, but it doesn't apply to me until it affects me. So if you're going to, if you're going to have a thing that you've prepared yourself for, you've trained for, and you've dedicated yourself to, have the same view and vision to this body as a whole. I'm sticking with the whole know thyself, understand what's happening so that you can just like live a long, healthy, athletic filled life.
Hell yeah.
That's all I got.
If you can, we'll be sending this out in a newsletter to everyone else who wasn't able to attend, as well as it'll also be up on the GB3 Athletics YouTube. So if you find this useful and the information useful, please share it with everybody around you, even if it's just one person. That one person can share it with someone else. Please do. Again, until next time, thank you very much. And we will see you guys on the next one, which will be in 2 weeks. And this will be with John. We'll be talking about not your gut check this time, but your bank account check and how to do that.
Different type of gut check.
Different type of gut check. So appreciate your time today, everybody. And thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye, George.
Laters.